What is good, gamers? Just wanted to come out with a little video today talking about Final Fantasy 15's gameplay and more specifically the combat. So what I have here in the footage is it's some post-game footage of the last level, Insomnia. I thought this would be a good place to get some raw gameplay footage and showcase 15's combat and what it's all about. There's some good bosses here. Not bosses, there's some good higher level monsters here that I'll be taking on, so you can just kind of get a taste of what the combat's all about overall. There are smaller foes that you'll be taking on, but this place just had a lot of bigger ones that take a little bit longer to kill, and I thought it would just be a good place to show off FF15's awesome-ass combat. So about the mechanics of the game, they're fairly simple, and they're overall really responsive and good, and it's a smooth gameplay. The only thing that might duck you off a couple times, not a couple times, more than a couple times, is the camera, but you get used to it. A little trick I found is going to the menu and set the camera in combat to far. Gives you a little bit wider view since a lot of the monsters you're taking on are very oversized, and they'll block your view. So that's a little tip that I learned, and I definitely suggest it for anybody playing this game. This game's got some addicting-ass combat, no doubt. I played the game for over 100 hours, and the story only takes about 25 hours to complete, so to play something that long, you gotta have something good, and it is the combat. And what makes it so addicting to me is the warping ability. Noxus's ability in combat is to warp, and it works really, really good. You can go from deep across the map, you can warp out of battles to recover HP, and it's just fun to do and satisfying to land a warp strike. It really makes the game because he's not overly athletic and does all this crazy mumbo jumbo, on his own, but the crazy thing that he can do is warp. It's a nice little power. I love it, and it's so fun to do. Just walking around, just throw the sword. You don't even have to be in combat. You just throw your sword out in front of you and warp to move around a little faster. It's just one of those things, great game idea and great combat ability that I really love, and what I think made it so addicting for me to play. Next thing I want to talk about in the combat is meleeing, which is just basic attacking, and this can vary depending on the weapon you have, which the main character, Noctis, you can equip an array of weapons to him. He can hold 4 at a time, but you'll have much more than that in your inventory. One-handed swords, great swords, daggers, machines, guns, you name it, they got it on here probably. And it really will change up your attack pattern depending on what you do, as you'd expect. The great sword's got more damage, slower attack speed, and then what I found personally to be my favorite is just the one-handed sword. It does a solid amount of damage, and it's fairly quick. And then I also like to switch to the daggers too, just for pure speed, which they still do good damage, and they're fast. They really are just the fastest weapon on the game, and if you're going for damage per second, then that's probably the ones you want to go with. And those are my 2 weapons of choice. I like to sprinkle in the other weapons as well, but those are my main 2 that whenever I was really in crunch time and really trying to beat somebody, that's what I was using. There's also magic is another weapon in the game. It's not typical like you usually do. You can only use it every so often in battle, and you have to harvest the magic elements from around the world as you're playing. And then you have to put them in flasks, which you have a limited number of flasks as well. So by the end of the game, I think you'll have about 10, unless you use the New Game Plus feature and carry over your flash. I think you'll end the game with about 10 if you go ahead and collect them all. So you have a limited number of them. They're pretty good. They're pretty devastating. It's a good way to open the battle, but there is friendly fire with it, so you just need to be wary of that. The next thing I want to move into in the combat is blocking, aka phasing, and parrying. Noxus's other ability is he can phase through attacks. So if you hold down square when the enemy's attacking, the attacks will go right through him. He'll turn like this bluish purple color. You've probably seen it happen a few times in the gameplay. It happens when he warps around too. So it's a pretty cool ability as well. You don't want to just press square. You see an enemy attacking, you just want to hold square and he'll kind of dodge it. And then when enemies do bigger attacks, you'll get the cue from the game to press square. It looks like it's saying to tap it, but don't tap it. Just hold that bitch down. And then you'll block the enemy's big attack. And then you'll want to press O to parry it. And you'll want to do this as much as you can because parries do a lot of damage and will activate link strikes sometimes. Which link strikes are attacks with your teammates in unison that do higher damage. And yeah, you can get those by parrying monsters' attacks or enemies' attacks. And or by just sneaking up behind them. Well, you don't even have to sneak behind them. You just got to get behind them and land an attack, and that'll usually activate a link strike. And they're actually pretty helpful in any situation. So if you can go ahead and get behind them, I suggest doing that. How you can get better in combat is just time, really. Just mess around with it and learn. But then also there's ability points that you will gain throughout the time, and then you can spend these ability points on the Ascension grid. They're not all for combat, but you're going to want to spend a decent amount of them on combat. So you unlock the ability points, then you spend them for new features in combat that can make things easier for you. My personal favorite one, it's one of the most expensive ones, is the ability to float in the air using a pole arm or a one-handed sword. So basically, if you've been watching the gameplay, you see me do it to a couple of these enemies. You just kind of jump in the air, hold down O, and then you move back with the analog stick and then point back towards them, and I'll continuously just like float in the air and deal damage. And you can do this non-stop, and the only way you'll be stopped is if you're attacked by an enemy, so you can't just do it willy-nilly. You got to try to watch the enemy's attack patterns and move out when you see it coming. But even if you do get hit, it's a good way to get a lot of damage uninterrupted really fast. And it's something I saw on the abilities on the Ascension grid that I knew I'd want to save up for early on. And yeah, if you are playing this game, that's something I suggest you do. Go ahead and look at all the things. Everyone plays differently, but just go ahead and read ahead and see what you might like to save up for. So the next thing I want to move into is the party members in combat. They are capable, and they do damage. It's pretty good AI for non-playable characters, I think. They play their part. The only flaw they have is that they don't use items, so they are going to be going down a lot, and they are relying on you. If you don't use a potion on them, some of the other party members, there's a save button which will bring them back to life at the cost of some of their total HP. And other party members will do that, but not as fast as you. So most of the time it's easier just to go ahead and go in the item menu, depending on what kind of battle situation you're in, and give those motherfuckers a potion or elixir or whatever you need to do. Another thing about your party members that is really good is the techniques that they use. So you have a tech bar. You can see on the gameplay it's those green bars that load. This is another thing you can spend on the Ascension grid. You can speed up the rate of the tech bar, an item you can add to speed up the tech bar, things like that. And they all have different techniques. There's a variety of them that you'll pick up throughout the game. The ones you start off with, they all use one tech bar each. So you save those up. You can rattle all the way up to 3. You can rattle off 3 techniques in a row. And they do a lot of damage. And the best thing about them is that you are invincible for the time of the technique. So I use this a lot, especially post-game, whenever you're fighting a lot in the harder dungeons. When a boss is about to deal one of his big attacks and your party members aren't quite as nimble as you or smart, so they won't get out of the way, I'll go ahead and use a technique just to save them and deal some damage on that boss. So yeah, use the techniques as much as you can. Use it to save your ass and use it to do damage. And then another thing to combat, kind of like little form change, is Noxus's armature. I've done it a few times in the gameplay already. It's where you see all the floating swords around me. So they are royal arms from the past kings of Lucis. There's 13 of them, and you can go collect them. You don't have to collect all 13 to beat the game. But if you are going to play post-game, I recommend doing it for sure. And even before you beat the game, I recommend doing it. It makes the last boss fight cooler, and just makes your armature look cooler throughout the game to have all 13 weapons floating around you. But yeah, it makes him basically deal a lot more damage in a lot faster rate. He can jump a lot higher. He can still take damage, but not as much. And he can't fully lose all his HP. He can just go down. But you can really deal some fast damage, and it's a good way to end a fight if you're struggling, or just to get some damage in while you can. And the royal arms, they're strong weapons. You can't equip them into one of your 4 item slots. I didn't do it too much on my first playthrough because as you're going through, they do have drawbacks. Yeah, they deal a lot of damage, and then they take away from your HP. So when you're leveled out, pretty close to the people you're fighting, you don't want to give up that much HP, so I would whip it out every now and then, a certain royal arm just to finish somebody off, or just for shits and gigs, But I didn't rely on them too much. Post-game, I use them a little bit more. I like to keep 1 or 2 of them just in one of my 4 main weapon slots just for the status boosts. But other than that, I didn't rely on the Royal Arms too much on the actual story playthrough, but they are still nice to have, and they are very helpful in the armor. And the last thing about the combat is there is summons in this game, like any Final Fantasy. And in this one, they are super duper powerful, and that's probably why you can't do them whenever you want. You have to meet specific conditions, which some people, they weren't happy about this because in all the Final Fantasies, you in a pinch, you could always just summon Bahamut or whoever you needed to go ahead and deal some good-ass motherfucking damage on somebody. But in this game, summons are gods of EOS, so I think it makes a little bit more sense to have them in this way, to where when they do come, it's devastating presence, and they'll pretty much just take out any enemy and all enemies in one fell swoop. I think in the gameplay I had a shot of Ramu earlier, dealing some pretty hefty damage to those two snake bitches. So anyways, guys, that's just a little talk about Final Fantasy's combat and why I thought it was so addicting, and just to give you a little look at it. If you haven't bought this game, go fucking buy it. I love it, honestly. I know a lot of people have mixed reviews on it and mixed feelings, but even though I think it's a solid game for anybody, and I think it'd be hard to hate, even though some people are saying that, but even if you're not going to play the post-game content, there's still a good 25 hours of story mode to be played. If you don't want to play full price, just keep waiting a little bit longer, but definitely when the price goes down, I think anybody who likes action games will really enjoy this, and the characters are great. I got invested into them. They're really cool, so go pick this game up. You're going to enjoy it, I think, and if you don't, then you just crazy. Anyways, you guys have a good day. I'm out.